Sometime in the last few months, two of the most opaque regimes on the planet got together, not at an official summit broadcast live, not at a conference with photographers and press releases, at a meeting that wasn't on any public agenda, that wasn't announced in advance, and that both governments went out of their way to downplay when Western intelligence services started asking questions. On one side, Xi Jinping, the leader of a 1.4 billion person superpower, the world's second largest economy with the largest active military on the planet. On the other, Kim Jong the leader of a country where 40% of the population goes hungry, who defied the entire world to build a functional nuclear arsenal, and who executes generals with anti-aircraft artillery when he sees fit. Two leaders who have deep reasons to mistrust each other, who have a track record of strained relations and genuine ruptures, who operate within political systems that compete for the loyalty of the same regional allies, and who, secretly, quietly, far from cameras, decided to meet anyway. The question that analysts at the CIA, the Pentagon, and the National Security Council are trying to answer is a simple one. What was agreed upon in that meeting? And what does it mean for the United States, for Japan, for South Korea, and for the balance of power in the Pacific? To understand why this meeting matters, you first need to understand why the China-North Korea alliance is both the most dysfunctional and the most enduring relationship in modern geopolitics. The two countries should be natural allies, single-party systems, a shared history of resistance against the West, a common border stretching over 1,400 kilometers. China was the only country that sent troops to defend North Korea during the Korean War, losing an estimated 180,000 soldiers in the process. But beneath the surface, the relationship is riddled with genuine mistrust. Beijing was deeply unsettled by North Korea's nuclear tests, which destabilize the region and provide a pretext for American military presence in Japan and South Korea. Kim Jong-un had his own uncle, who was the main informal communication channel with Beijing, executed with anti-aircraft artillery in 2013, a deliberate signal of independence from any Chinese oversight. And Xi Jinping spent years trying, and failing, to use North Korea's economic dependence as leverage to moderate its nuclear behavior. What keeps the two of them together despite all of that is something more powerful than affinity, mutual necessity. And that necessity became dramatically more acute with the war in Iran, the pressure over Taiwan, and the global geopolitical realignment of the past 2 years. For Beijing, North Korea isn't an ally, it's a strategic asset, and it's an asset with 3 specific functions that no other country in the world can replace. The first function is geographic buffer. North Korea is the land border between China and American forces stationed in South Korea. As long as an independent North Korea exists, even an unstable one, even a troublesome one, there are no American troops directly on China's border. If North Korea were to collapse and be reunified under Seoul's US-backed government, China would wake up with American soldiers 100 kilometers from Beijing. That's a strategic nightmare Beijing will never allow. The second function is proxy pressure. When China wants to ramp up pressure on the United States in the Pacific without exposing its own fingerprints, North Korea runs a missile test, or launches a military satellite, or threatens South Korea. Every North Korean action forces the United States to divert resources, diplomatic attention, and military capacity away from what actually keeps Beijing up at night, Taiwan. The third function is the newest and the most unsettling for American strategists: reverse technological cooperation. North Korea has decades of hands-on experience building and testing intercontinental ballistic missiles under sanctions with minimal resources, using creative engineering workarounds that Chinese engineers study with genuine interest. North Korean tests are, in part, data labs for China's own missile program. On Kim Jong-un's side, the equation is more straightforward, but no less complex. The first need is economic survival. China accounts for between 90% and 95% of all of North Korea's foreign trade. Fuel, food, industrial materials, electronic components, everything the North Korean regime needs to function comes across the Chinese border. Without that flow, the regime doesn't survive a winter. That's not dependence, that's existence. The second need is diplomatic cover. On the UN Security Council, China uses its veto power to block or water down sanctions resolutions against North Korea. Without that shield, international sanctions would be orders of magnitude more severe. China doesn't veto out of sympathy. It vetoes because a collapsed North Korea would be a disaster for Beijing. Refugees flooding across the border en masse, political chaos, and possibly American forces pushing north to secure nuclear arsenals. The third need is the newest and most revealing: recognition as a legitimate nuclear power. Kim Jong-un spent the last decade building a nuclear arsenal precisely to reach a position where he could negotiate as an equal with major powers. What the secret meeting with China may have represented is exactly that. Not a request for help, but a negotiation between two countries that recognize each other as genuine holders of real nuclear capability. Based on communications intercepts, analysis of troop movement patterns and logistics, and human sources in the region, American intelligence services have pieced together a rough picture of what was discussed. The first topic was coordination over the conflict in Iran. The American war with Iran reshuffled the geopolitical map in ways that both China and North Korea needed to assess together. With the US militarily engaged in the Middle East, there's a window of American strategic distraction in the Pacific, and both regimes needed to coordinate on whether and how to exploit that window. The second topic was direct military cooperation. North Korea shipped hundreds of thousands of artillery rounds to Russia in the Ukraine war, in exchange for military satellite technology and missile re-entry systems. China was, according to American assessments, brokering parts of that technical deal. And the meeting may have pushed triangular cooperation to the next level. The third topic, and the most sensitive, was Taiwan. Any Chinese military scenario involving Taiwan has to account for what North Korea does simultaneously. Whether Kim Jong-un takes advantage of the distraction to provoke South Korea, or holds things steady to avoid forcing the US to split its attention in a way that paradoxically frees it to focus on Taiwan, that calculation requires coordination. And then there's the third dimension that none of the three governments officially acknowledge it, but that American intelligence is documenting with growing concern: the formation of an informal axis of military cooperation between China, Russia, and North Korea. It's not a formal alliance like NATO. There's no signed treaty, no headquarters, no integrated chain of command, but it has something more adaptable and harder to fight: complementary interests, bilateral technology transfer, and informal tactical coordination that allows each party to deny any formal structure while reaping the practical benefits of a real alliance. North Korea supplies low-cost ammunition and military manpower to Russia in Ukraine. Russia supplies aerospace and nuclear technology to North Korea. China provides both of them access to the global financial system and supply chains that sanctions were supposed to have cut off, through intermediary companies, third-country banks, and trade routes designed specifically to circumvent the Western sanctions system. Each transfer happens through a separate channel. Each partner can deny knowledge of the others, but the cumulative effect is a level of military capability that none of the three countries would achieve on their own under sanctions, and a containment challenge for the United States that is qualitatively and quantitatively different from anything since the Cold War. What does this alignment actually mean for American interests in the Pacific? For Japan, it means that any conflict over Taiwan or on the Korean Peninsula simultaneously activates threats from multiple directions: North Korean missiles on one side, Chinese naval pressure on the other. The American bases at Okinawa and Yokosuka, critical to any Taiwan defense operation, are within confirmed range of North Korea's ballistic missile arsenal. A Taiwan crisis could be deliberately paired with a North Korean provocation designed to force the US to split resources across two simultaneous theaters. For South Korea, the immediate risk is different but equally real. Seoul sits just 55 kilometers from the North Korean border. Within range of conventional artillery, no missiles needed. In any regional escalation, South Korea is automatically in the line of fire, which dramatically constrains American escalation options without risking an ally of 52 million people. For the United States, the most unsettling implication is operational. American military planning has been built over decades on the assumption that the country would rarely need to fight high-capability adversaries in multiple theaters at the same time. That assumption is being challenged in real time, with Iran in the Middle East, China in the Pacific, Russia in Europe, and North Korea as an additional variable that any one of those actors can activate as a distraction. Washington isn't ignoring this, but the available responses have real limitations that American planners privately acknowledge. The first response was the reinforcement of regional alliances. Defense agreements with Japan, South Korea, and Australia were strengthened, with new intelligence-sharing commitments, joint military exercises at unprecedented frequency and scale, and pre-positioning of American equipment at strategic locations across the Pacific. The second response was the expansion of secondary sanctions. Sanctions that punish not just China and North Korea directly, but companies in third countries that facilitate trade with both regimes. The results have been uneven. Some routes were closed, others adapted within weeks. The fundamental problem remains. The United States is trying to contain, with 20th century tools, sanctions, bilateral treaties, forward military presence, a threat that operates on 21st century networks, decentralized, adaptable, and designed specifically to exploit the blind spots of the American containment system. Here's what nobody in Washington wants to say out loud, but what the numbers and the facts demand be said. For the first time since the end of the Cold War, the United States is simultaneously facing three adversaries with real nuclear capability, coordinating their actions in a sufficiently integrated way to create problems that none of the three would generate on their own. The Soviet Union was a single adversary, geographically concentrated, with a command structure that made nuclear deterrence relatively legible. What exists today is fundamentally different. Three regimes with completely different strategic cultures, different escalation ladders, different risk thresholds, and with incentives to coordinate precisely in the windows when the United States is most distracted. The secret meeting between China and North Korea wasn't an isolated event. It was one more data point in a pattern that has been solidifying for years, and that the war with Iran has dramatically accelerated. The question that the most serious American analysts are asking is no longer whether this axis exists. It's how far the coordination goes, and whether the United States will figure out the answer in time to do something about it, or only after the answer becomes too obvious to ignore.